piece that's got a live guest.
Exactly. And
I shouldn't phrase it that way. It makes it sound like we've had hit pieces with dead guests before.
we'll just turn it over to Sarah now. The New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, featuring your hosts, Gabe Reinick and Ken Holyoke.
Welcome back to the Brunswick Archaeology Podcast in Fredericton, New Brunswick, snowy Fredericton, New Brunswick. I'm Gabe Reinick, and I'm joined, as I am just about every fortnight, by Ken Holyoke, who appears to be in his studio in Lethbridge, Alberta. How are you, Ken?
Not too bad. Yes, it's a little bit snowy here too. Actually, we've had some snow blow around all day today, but it's still very cold. We've been in the sub -20 range for about a week and a half now, almost 2 weeks. So,
interesting. When did the Chinooks come?
So actually, it is kind of odd that we have not had one for a while. But it looks like toward the end of next week we warm up. So I'm guessing we're about to be Chinooked. So everybody's about to have a crippling migraine over the next few days.
Good. Yeah. Have you been doing anything to stay sane during the winter?
I've been going to the gym, running around in the track at the gym, which is it changes directions every couple of days, which makes it exciting.
Interesting.
And my favorite bike ride, actually, you'll like this, is Acadia National Park is loaded into the video bike ride on one of the bikes at the gym. So I bike around Acadia National Park usually twice a week.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, that sounds good. I'm glad that's all working. But speaking of climate change, we've got quite an exciting show lined up for the listener here. We're going to be talking first about with Robin, who's the head of the Canadian Archaeology Association Climate Change Committee.
Yep, Robin Woywitka from McEwan University in Edmonton.
That's great, and he's going to be catching us up, telling us a little bit about his own work in sort of environmental archaeology and climate change, and then also on sort of initiatives they're working on the CAA. And then we have a very exciting, I believe we're calling it a hot hit piece. Is that what we're calling it?
I think so. I think that's what it's called now, yes, is a hot hit piece.
I would encourage the listener to not Google that, but that's what we're calling it. So, but in the meantime, Ken, the listener may have noticed that I still introduced us as the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. And how many words is that, Ken?
New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word. Archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY. New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. But we can find us at newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com.
And we have a website, too.
And newbrunswickarchaeology.com.
That's right. It's still hard to believe that wasn't taken, isn't it?
I know, eh?
I think there's probably some cultural resource management company in New Jersey that really hates us right now.
That could be it. Yeah. That's our peak competition.
Yeah, but anyway, Ken, so as the listener, the longtime listener will know, we've had some doubts about this name since the very beginning, because it is not a particularly exciting name for a podcast. It'd be a great name for a CRM company in New Jersey.
Yeah. And in this episode alone, I think is a testament to that. We talk a lot about Alberta archaeology and CRM in Nova Scotia today.
We do. It's true. And but the other thing that I think sets our podcast apart from other podcasts is that we try to regard ourselves as in partnership with the listener, right?
That's right.
And part of building good relationships with your listener is that you would never just steal their intellectual property. At least without compensating them.
Yep.
And so, Ken, if we had a listener who was to write in with a new name for this podcast that we could use, how would we be compensating them if we decided that was the one we wanted to use?
Well, Gabe, we just went through probably one of the most special episodes that we've had, and that was that we celebrated our 50th episode on
That's
season
right.
3, episode 11. So that
means
that
our Diamond Jubilee? What do we call that?
Well, so we're going to talk about that, actually. So that means for 50 episodes, and presumably several hundred hours now, We've been named the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, and while we haven't found the perfect new name, I think even as quinquagenarians, we continue to believe the perfect new name is out there. Yes, on this Golden Jubilee.
Jubilee.
Yes, I think that we can actually treat our listeners to something truly special. With that, Gabe, does the name William Jennings Bryan ring a bell?
In an American context, yes.
Well, there you go. Then you might know the history about the abandonment of the gold standard. And frankly, with the state of the world today, you and our listeners would benefit from some peace, security, and sweet, sweet gold.
The listener will know that if I had one friend who I thought was going to descend into gold, probably going to be Ken.
That's right. For our golden anniversary, and for the lucky listener that renames the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast, we're going to take you on a gilded tour of the Golden State, from prospection to the past. This is an all-inclusive tour. Is going to start by getting you on a plane.
Prospection to profit.
Yes, to San Francisco. You'll be flying first class and be treated to bottomless Gold Royale cocktails. That's champagne, vanilla vodka, and a liberal dosing of Goldschlager, paired with the finest in gold snacks, including goldfish cheddar cheese crackers, rolled gold pretzels, and sun-made California golden raisins. Once we touch down in San Fran, we'll pick up a Gold Choice car from Hertz and hop on the I-80 to Coloma to visit the Marshall Gold Discovery State Historic Park in California. There, you'll take part in the Gold Discovery Tour, a 45-minute walking tour that takes us through the history of the gold rush in Coloma, learning about how James W. Marshall discovered gold in 1848 along the American River.
Oh, wow.
After which, you're going to get to pawn for your own tiny flecks of gold, potentially earning yourself dozens of cents of the precious metal. Yes, according to the World Gold Council, the U.S. currently holds 8,000 tons of gold, they'll be lighter when you're done your journey. We'll head back to San Francisco for dinner at Golden Boy Pizza near Chinatown. Take some photos at the Golden Gate Bridge and enjoy some golden opportunities. This is a cocktail featuring sherry, white vermouth, golden sesame, macadamia nut, Cointreau, and cacao at the Pacific Cocktail Heaven.
And you'll want to notify your bartender if you have any allergies at all.
Exactly. And then we're going to walk or even stumble back down a block to the retro decor and European style of the Golden Gate Hotel in Belden Place. Breakfast is included. Of course, that'll be pain doré. And after visiting with Skittles the cat, we're going to tour the city and have lunch at the Golden Crab House.
But who's Skittles the cat?
It's the resident cat at the Golden Gate Hotel, actually.
Oh, that's great. Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
She was a rescue. We're going to have lunch at the Golden Crab House, which is a Vietnamese restaurant. And at Golden Hour, we're going to make our way down to the Mission Bay waterfront for Night 2 festivities, where we're going to take in none other than the Golden State Warriors NBA, some NBA action. And it wouldn't be an evening without the NB Pod if we didn't have a tipple. So we're going to make our way up to the Hennessy Bar at the Chase Center. We're going to sip on Golden 75s. This is a refined cocktail that features Hennessy VSOP, Lemon Simple, and Moet and Chandron. We've prearranged with the staff at the Chase Center so that these glasses will also be adorned with edible gold flakes, ensuring that you've ingested the maximum amount of precious metals on your journey. The next day, we're going to leave early to the Hayward Executive Airport, where we've partnered with the Sultan of Brunei to shuttle us down the coast to LA in his fully customized Boeing 747-430, which features a living room, bedroom, and bathroom decorated in gold, as well as solid gold wash basins. There's elegance, there's extravagance, there's gaudy, and then there's this plane.
And also, Ken, we should say that if you're an immediate family member of the Sultan of Brunei, you're not eligible for this prize.
Exactly. Touching down in the golden sunshine of LA, we're going to hire a gold cab taxi to take us to 245 North Saltaire Avenue in Brentwood, Los Angeles. This is the priming filming location for the Golden Girls sitcom. It's unclear if they're going to let us inside at this time, but you can be sure we'll be gilded when we arrive at the Gold Spoon Jamaican restaurant in Inglewood later that evening. Finally, that afternoon, we're off to the Mojave Desert in our Batumi Gold 2025 new Range Rover to check out the Mesquite Gold Mine and to see the process of extracting this precious metal and stare in awe and probably shock at the mining process. To wrap up our trip, we're not going to send you home with nothing in your pocket, so you, lucky listener, are going to receive the first edition 2025 50th Anniversary Gold Edition New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast gold stickers, and that's all you're going to celebrate. And Gabe, I'm just going to as a preview for this, you get you don't get one of the first anniversary tickets stickers, because that's for the listener. But you get to see what these guys look like.
What these are gonna look like, and are we gonna post these on social? How are we gonna make these available?
We're gonna post these on social media, and they're gonna be widely available to anybody who we meet, just to celebrate our 50th anniversary. And actually, I might need to get to stall here because I'm trying to figure out where it is.
Well, I mean, and that's important, Ken, because I think Neil Young mentioned that the real thing that's important is what happens after the gold rush.
That's right.
So this is just the beginning.
This is just the beginning.
The beginning.
So, Gabe, I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see what these 50th edition...
I can't wait. This is going to look great on the back of the Sultan's yacht.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh, that is not bad.
It's pure gold.
That's absolutely pure gold. The listener can't see this, but it's two colors that are each reminiscent of a forest fire. And I think it's burnt orange and then gold, but it's kind of a burnt gold. So I think it's going to look great.
Exactly.
All right, Ken. So where would the winning entry be sent to?
They would be sending that to newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com. That's New Brunswick Archaeology, all one word. Archaeology spelled ARCHAEOLOGY. newbrunswickarchaeology@gmail.com.
That's right. Listener, don't hesitate. Get your entries in. And Ken, what is in that mailbag right now?
So we actually don't have any new mail. We had a kind of an ongoing conversation with Trish, who had sent us some images of what she thought might be a stone cutting tool. And we were able to do some identification. We reached out to friend of the show, David Black, who let us know that his initial thoughts were that it's probably made on ballast flint, and that in one of these quirks of kind of New Brunswick archaeology, it may actually be an artifact, but it may be a Paleolithic artifact from Europe. And I think I've shared this on the show before, but I had a similar situation years ago. I was doing some monitoring for a natural gas line installation in the city of St. John, right beside the Carleton Martello Tower. And we encountered an entire layer of ballast flint. And so this is flint that comes over in the fronts of ships and was dumped in harbors kind of all around the Maritimes and parts of New England. And within that ballast layer that was probably used for sort of leveling out the very steep terrain surrounding the Martello Tower, there was what appeared to be a stemmed scraper that some searching around seemed to indicate it was consistent with a Mesolithic scraper. So,
cool.
Some like a 10 to, I don't know, what's the Mesolithic like?
We call it the Archaic.
The Archaic, exactly. Yeah. The old world Archaic. But yeah, so it may be that what Trish found was an example of this, that it was an artifact that was scooped up with some other stuff and brought across the ocean and dumped elsewhere.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
And but also in that mailbox, Ken, I believe we have a new prize read that is for something for the listener to read while they're traveling around with the Sultan. Is that right?
Yeah. So we and we do wonder if sometimes our listeners think that we're pulling their leg, but we do have real contests occasionally, and so this one in particular,
and with it, real contest winners. I mean, we're not saying that the other contests aren't real. We're just saying that there haven't been winners yet.
There you go. Yes. So we had entrants put in for our 50th anniversary contest, which was a copy of Jeff Boudreau's A New England
typology of New England lithic.
Of Native American projectile points. It's right here on the floor beside me.
Oh, that's great.
And it's the field edition, or what's the handbook edition? Handbook edition. So it's a smaller format, kind of has all the best hits, something you might be able to throw in your backpack when you're out doing surveys. And I've thrown the contestants' names into my favorite random name generator, which is wheelofnames.com. The winner of our 50th anniversary contest is Derek Pau. Derek, I'm apologizing if I mispronounce your name, but Paaauw. Derek, you are the winner of the Projectile Point book. And I'd also like to announce that our runner-up is Taylor. And so, Taylor, you have won one of, I can't remember what we had promised, but we'll go back. It's I think, a New Brunswick archaeology bibliography book.
That's a great question. What I might do is I'll have to ask Taylor which books she has.
Okay.
And we'll try to figure this out.
Well,
so I will make a note to do that.
Yes. Those of you who have entered, thank you so much. And we are happy to share the love and the prizes and I guess cheers to 50 more.
Cheers to 50 more. We're still here. We're still going. It's not after the gold rush here yet.
All right, we are joined today with Dr. Robin Woywitka, who's an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology, Economics, and Political Science at McEwan University in Calgary. He has a PhD in earth science with a specific focus on geoarchaeology, and an MGIS with a focus on digital terrain analysis from University of Calgary, and an MA in anthropology from University of Alberta. So he's a true geoarchaeologist. And so while Robin is an archaeologist, he's also a quaternary scientist. And he specializes in geomorphology, geospatial science, and geoarchaeology. His current research focuses on how industrialization and climate change affect the preservation of heritage landscapes contained in the geological and archaeological records of Western Canada. And prior to joining the Academy, Robin worked in the private consulting world in Alberta and was a cultural land use analyst for the government of Alberta. His geoarchaeological and geological work has appeared in journals such as Quaternary Research, PNAS, Arctic Anthropology, Paleoamerica, and Journal of Glacial Archaeology. Robin is also the chair of the Canadian Archaeological Association's Climate Change Committee and is joining us today to talk about climate change and the impact it is having on archaeological resources in Canada today and in the past. And so thanks for coming on, Robin. Welcome to the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Just before we get started, Ken used a phrase in your introduction that I think we should explain. But what's a quaternary scientist? What's the quaternary?
Yeah, the quaternary is the last 2.58 million years of Earth's history, and it is the time period that is characterized by lots of cold periods interspersed with warm periods, so ice ages. So since about 2.5 million years ago, the Earth has fluctuated between glacial phases and interglacial phases. The last one was called the last glacial maximum. It lasted from about 25,000 to 18,000 years ago. And we're currently in the most recent interglacial called the Holocene, which started 11,000.
So winter is coming, basically.
It was supposed
and so that's
yeah.
So you're a kind of a climate change guy over a huge time period, but we're going to, I guess, talk to you mostly about more recent climate change. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Could you tell us maybe about, I guess you sort of introduced it a little bit already, but your research is broadly focused on human and environmental interactions in the quaternary, of course, because I guess that's the only time there really are human and environmental interactions. And how humans respond to climate change, particularly in northern Alberta. And could you tell us a little bit about your work?
A lot of my work was focused initially in the oil sands region. I started as a consulting archaeologist there in the 19... And it was a really interesting place because something happened there at the end of the last glacial maximum about 13,000 years ago that drastically altered the environment, not only of the Fort McMurray area, but also the entire planet. This is the Glacial Lake Agassiz flood. So when there were continental-sized glaciers on the planet, big lakes formed in front of them. And one of the biggest that ever formed was Glacial Lake Agassiz that stretched all the way from northwest Saskatchewan to the Dakotas. And periodically, this thing would decant, it would drain. And one time, at least, it drained through what is now the Clearwater River and then went down the Athabasca, eventually into the Arctic Ocean. And archaeologists had been aware of this sort of scoured landscape that was left behind by the flood for a long time. And when I was doing CRM work, cultural resource management work there, we talked a lot about what the effect of such an event would have on people right there, and more broadly on the environment and climate. Since the 90s, this event has become a big area of study in the Quaternary. That flood has been looked at as the cause of something, or at least a contributing factor to the Younger Dryas, which was a period of cooling that happened when we were coming out of the last glacial maximum. But I worked there in consulting, and it was just tantalizing, but I could never, hit any of the real issues meaningfully because you just move on to the next project. And then I ended up moving to the government, where I became the regional archaeologist overseeing the regulatory archaeology there. And I thought, well, there's a lot of questions we need answered, but we can't answer them without knowing about the environment. Like, we couldn't even figure out if we had sites that represented one occupation or 50 occupations over time, because there's so few stratified sites. So I went out to this area with a colleague called Dwayne Fraze, who's a quaternary geologist, and I said, can you help me address some of these issues? Like, do we have one occupation, many occupations? What would it look like after the flood? When was the flood? And we went out there, and he had all these ideas, and he said, this is low-hanging fruit for a PhD, which is the biggest lie I've ever been told in my life. There's no such thing as low-hanging fruit in graduate education. But I did do it. And what we did was we focused on just the timing and the geomorphic effect of the flood. And we came up with all these things where it looks like the flood was pretty early. It was like 13,000 years ago. And that it created a bunch of these landforms that were actually like gravel bars, but on a mega scale, right? You go to the river in your hometown today, you might see gravel bars that are made up of gravel that you might put in a driveway or something. This is bars that are made up of boulders. That's how big the rocks in the gravel are. So unimaginable magnitude. But the bed forms that were left behind were the places where people made stone tools, right? It's where a lot of the sites that we find up there are. And so we were able to link this geomorphic event, which kind of bleeds into a climatic event, to occupational landscape and land use, and started to be able to pose the question, well, why did people use these landforms and not the rest of the landscape? Did they use the rest of the landscape was another question. So it just keeps generating a bunch of hypotheses as we go along, right? So a lot of the work till in the oil sands was based on like geology and site formation stuff. And now I've moved a little bit more into like ice patch work and hoping to get more into aeolian environments and wetlands, where we're wondering, we think that we don't have a lot of wetland sites because we don't look for them, right? So we're currently doing a project in the sand dunes north of Grand Prairie that looks at wetlands and use of sand dunes as well. And hopefully there we have a record, a better preserved environmental record along with an archaeological record where we can start to link.
Very cool. Can we get you to elaborate just a little bit more too on your wetlands work? I think that's something that the New Brunswick listener will be interested in, because that's something that gets discussed every once in a while.
And this is really interesting stuff that you and I have talked about, that there seems to be some kind of chronological relationship with sort of the vacillating wet and dry periods in the last several thousand years. Yeah.
So one of the big things that we're interested in the Holocene just overall as quaternary people is drought cycles, and when was it dry, when was it hot, when was it wet, when was it cool, right? And these things are hard to find in a lot of terrestrial records. So we usually get these records out of lakes and out of wetlands, right? Because they host, they gather a lot of paleoenvironmental indicators like pollen, macrofossils, bugs, all kinds of things, twigs, wood, and we can radiocarbon date them. And it's an anoxic environment that can preserve organic material, which is our big challenge in the uplands, say in Fort Mac on those bed forms, but also in these sand dune environments where we find a lot of sites, the organics don't get preserved. And you have potentially compressed stratigraphy or very little deposition period, so you don't have any stratigraphic separation, but you have that in wetlands, right? And so we're really interested in aeolian wetland complexes, because the idea is if there's some disturbance to the surface of a stabilized sand dune that is significant enough to remobilize sediment, it will blow into the wetland and you'll see sand layers, right, in your peat deposit, and then peat, and then sand, and then peat, right? We've seen this in around the Great Lakes. There's really good records of aeolian interbeds in peatlands. And my thought as an archaeologist coming to this is, we know from talking to indigenous communities, and we know from historic records, that the entire landscape is used by people, including wetlands. And that means there's the potential for preserved archaeological sites in wetlands. So there's a few sites. There's one about two in the oil sands where we have found archaeology underneath peat and been able to get limiting dates. The idea here, though, is to hopefully find stuff in the wetlands. You never know, right? But it's kind of tough. But we're just starting with, do these things tell us how complete is their Holocene record? And do they tell us about landscape stability? And then from there, if we see, variations, whether it's stable, it's unstable, will we be able to tell from the paleoecological record from the wetlands or adjacent lakes if those things coincide with dry climatic periods? Or is it a forest fire, right? Or somehow, eventually, was it human managed? That's the idea.
Find that Cody point, with the haft element and everything still attached to it in the wetland, eh?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
That's the research goal. Yeah.
And do you core it? Just out of curiosity, are you looking at material in cores? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this was my question: was what's the actual methods here? Yeah.
Okay, so we go out and we take a thing. Okay, so this is a developing story. We started with a Russian peat core, which is just basically a half barrel core with a sharp end. Right.
It's also a great cocktail, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Great cocktail, terrible nightclub. That's the
yeah. And you take the thing, and just with your own body weight, you push it into the peat. And for most wetland studies, this is okay because the peat is wet enough that you can push it down, and you get extension rods, and you just yank the cores out. You get sort of half a core, right? It kind of you turn it, and it cuts it in half, and you wrap that up and take it back to the lab. And if you're going only, say, maybe a meter deep, that's doable here. But we came into something that was really challenging, which is the peats that we're working in are super compact, which means they're dried out, and that's probably because it's been like a drought period here now to date. Right? So the wetlands aren't as saturated as they could be, and this thing does not go in as advertised. We were in the field and we're like, it's not happening. We're like phoning and emailing experts, and they're like, okay, get this fancy sledgehammer. Funny story. I went to Grand Prairie Acklands and I said, I found the sledgehammer. It's like neon orange and it's full of shotgun shot, and it's like a zero impact sledgehammer. And it was $450.
Sorry, it's full of shotgun shot?
Yeah, it's full of pellets. And so it was...
Is this like the thing on Jurassic Park?
I haven't watched it in a long time, so maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. It's amazing, and it was $450. And I took it to the cash register, and the woman behind the counter scanned it, and she saw the number, and she went, no. and she
Nice.
discounted it for me to like $199. Still the most expensive sledgehammer I ever bought. But we like pounded the thing in, and we were able to get stuff out, and we're able to subsample from the cores, but there's a few that you have to throw away because it just disturbs the stuff too much. Like if we were going to do bulk density and like really hardcore like wetland soils work, it'd be pretty tough to use these. But we're just looking at getting some geochronology, mineral contents and things, and so we have to pick the best cores. So the idea now, we've looked into vibrocores and other things, and there's some permafrost setups. But basically, you have to kind of create your own core, which is like get a mini jackhammer. It's like it's a MacGyvered percussion core that we should be able to get through a lot faster. So, but that said, we got enough to do basal ages. And the first goal is to establish a model of lateral expansion of the wetlands. Because most of the time when people do this work, they just use the surface topography to guess at the deepest part. And they'll sink their core there. But we're interested in, what was the lag time between the sand dune stabilizing and then the wetland infilling? And did that happen just at a constant rate all the way through the Holocene until it reached where it did? Or did it go in fits and starts? And what controlled the fits and starts? Was it climate? Was it just the topography of the basin? So prior to coring, we did GPR work to get like a bathymetry of the wetland to target our cores. So we have the stuff, and we have a master's student right now just picking out the radiocarbon.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So just to step back here, like we talked about Lake Agassiz and sort of this big flood event, and because a lot of our listeners are like located in the Northeast, they're probably not as familiar with sort of the populating of northern Alberta, and so a lot of this probably ties in with, for example, like when the ice-free corridor became viable, and so the earliest people in northern Alberta are like arriving sometime between about 14 and 13,000 years ago. And then there's a massive flood event. Is that sort of like what the timing would be?
Yeah, it's right at the end of sort of the ice-free corridor time, I guess. At the time of the flood, the ice margin is in northwestern Saskatchewan. So basically all of Alberta is ice-free at this point. So whether it's a corridor or, just a new landscape remains to be seen. And the date is around 13,000. So and the way we worked it in my dissertation work is we had luminescence ages on some stratified deposits and looked at the archaeology within that and the fabric of the artifacts in relation to ice wedge casts and things, and make the case that the occupation at that site is probably about that age, so like right after the flood. But it's luminescence aging and all of that stuff. So we like it, but it needs more work. More people need to go out there and do chronological things. So yeah, this would be like right at the tail end of the deglacial story in Alberta. Yeah.
That's neat. But part of what we're going to talk to you, I guess, about today, though, after some of that background, is that you're in charge, or the chair of the CAA Climate Change Committee, and some of that has to do with just effects on climate today on the archaeological record, and also what the archaeological record can teach us that would be good to know about climate change. And so your perspective is really an interesting one, since you're viewing climate change in that deep past. And so are there any lessons that your work has for contemporary responses to climate change?
Yeah, I think that, there's so much.
So I'll tell the listener right now that Robin has an index card that actually has a series of answers for this that he uses for grant proposals, and he's actually just rifling through the deck right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's it's kind of funny because one of the main things that that we need to understand about today's climate change is like the level of impact that it had in the past on the landscape itself, right? And we're seeing it in real time today. But by looking into the past, we can kind of understand sort of end member scenarios, like how much did the sea level rise and all of that. And we can look at, old shorelines and new and present day shorelines and calculate like sediment loss and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a very logistical side to it, where in studying past landscape evolution, you can gain insight into where this stuff might be going today. Another thing is that in the archaeological record, because it's physical, right? It maintains a record of human responses to change through time. They can be cultural, they can be environment related, whatever, right? The thing about most Canadian archaeology is that it is housed in the same archive as our paleoenvironmental work, right? So, for example, you go to a site that's in a buried soil, a paleosol somewhere, right? That paleosol is like a shrunken little version of what some people today call the critical zone, right? Where all of the interactions between the earth, the rock, the air, water, and living things, including humans, right? That's where all of it happens. And archaeological sites very frequently occur in these old versions of the critical zone. So in one place, you can get what people were doing and what their environment was like, all right there. And I think one thing that we can learn, and that I think have stepped away from a little bit in archaeology, is instead of treating those two things as separate archives, like they're one thing. We're all part of this one system. And over the last 20 or 30 years, we've sort of, environmental archaeology kind of got a little bit of a poo-poo, and then it was like, now we need it again, and it's sitting right there for us. These archaeological sites are very often direct remnants of past ecocultural landscapes, if you like, right? And we can suss out connections.
The call to arms for micromorphology, basically.
Yeah.
We just lost 8 listeners as soon as you said micromorphology, Ken. That's on the...
But so it's there, right? And we can trace how people move through time, how if we start looking at the seeds and the botanicals, all of that, we can see how people are using landscapes, changing it and adjusting through time, right? And of course, it's a different time today. The nature of climate change is a little bit different. Different people, different cultures will react in different ways. That said, the understanding of the environment and the adjustments that we make to drastic changes like the Younger Dryas or like the flood, right? Which is a massive landscape and climate change in a blink of an eye, like within a life, right? Which is what we're experiencing right now. The insights into how people dealt with that in the past, societally, culturally, the interrelations between themselves and the environment can only be gleaned from the archaeological record, right? And stories, right? And Indigenous knowledge in Canada, because that's who was here. And we have to listen to that record to learn anything at all. So we have to listen to the archaeological record, and we have to listen to Indigenous communities and knowledge keepers to learn about it. And so there's those insights that I think are invaluable. And the great irony being that climate change is destroying the records of past climate change and our response to it.
Yeah. And so this is kind of something that I'm interested in. Like, so how is contemporary climate change affecting your ability to do climate change research in like northern Alberta? So you talked about how like we're in a drought period, which is making it very hard to sample these wetlands. I'm guessing with wildfires and all this other stuff, it's actually making it more difficult to go out and collect these data, right?
Absolutely. So with the wildfires alone, it's crazy. Like we're talking to CRM companies who have to shut down for weeks on end because of these fires, and field scientists all across Western Canada are challenged by this. I've people are squeezing their field seasons into these kind of shoulder seasons from what we'd usually do, because the fires are just like so prevalent and unpredictable that it's very difficult to launch a big field campaign thinking it could be over in a day, right? So that is very difficult, and it's also altering the record very quickly. Like, of course, we see on the coasts, this is the most visible and probably highest magnitude effect, but there are these more insidious but just as large magnitude effects happening. A lot of Canadian archaeology is not buried very deeply. So a wildfire can affect the information in an archaeological site directly, but then there's these cascading things that happen afterwards. That landscape is now very prone to sediment movement, right? It's very prone to slope failures. It's prone to water moving through it, which you can either erode a site entirely physically, but also increased water infiltration in a wildfire area will alter the chemistry of any artifacts that may have some chemistry in them that you can analyze. And then you get these logistical problems, like the peat is way too hard to get through. So there's it affects the record itself, how much is there, the nature of what is there, and then our ability to get at it.
Yeah, like when I worked for Parks Canada, the Waterton Park mitigation was going on.
Yeah.
Basically, that huge fire in Waterton, and it burned so hot that it essentially burned off all the soil and exposed all of these archaeological sites that were just like sitting on the surface now, because all of everything that had developed above it is gone.
Yep. Yeah, and there's lots of, well, actually, there's not that many studies. It feels like lots, but there's studies of wildfires in the States, and there's some in Saskatchewan too, where these things burn off, and there's lithic scatters just exposed right at the surface. And I know there's one in Saskatchewan. I cannot remember who did it, but it was big enough that when they did the surface survey, they were able to say, like, nobody ever would have dug a shovel test here. So in a lot of ways, we don't even know what we're losing at times when we're dealing with this, because it's such a broad landscape effect that areas like wetlands or low spots on the terrain that we don't usually test as archaeologists, we're losing records. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier too, Robin. I guess you've done some work on ice sheets too, ice patches. Sorry. Did you want to? Could you riff a little bit about sort of that in archaeology and the effects of those thawing and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the famous ice patches in Canada are in Northwest Territories and Yukon and British Columbia, and they really revolutionized our look into northern archaeology, because they freeze dry organic material that we can radiocarbon date, and things that parts of toolkits and beyond, right? Clothing and art, things that we just don't see in the archaeological record, are preserved in ice patches, right? And so they're incredible archives of the human past. But again, the irony, the only way we're seeing them is because they're melting so quickly. So there's been big efforts in Northwest Territories and Yukon to inventory these places and monitor them and all of that kind of work. And that's happening in the States to a degree as well. But Todd Christensen and Diana Tirlia at the Royal Alberta Museum and Archaeological Survey started a small, scrappy project to fill the gap between Yukon and Montana, and then when I got to McEwan, we got some money to look at them, and we're finding different things than the other places. A lot less archaeology, like pretty much nothing in terms of archaeology. But keep in mind, it's like 16 patches of 130 we've identified have been visited, so it's by not representative in any way. But what is there is really great environmental records. It's you cut into the face of an ice patch and you see basically like paleosols in the ice, right? These layers of material that have accumulated on the surface and then frozen and been preserved. So we've done paleoenvironmental work on that to look at how far back they go, what the communities were like, and we're able to get a sense of tree line fluctuations through the Holocene, and also insight into a pretty unique environment, right? Not a lot of things use ice patches, Well, actually, a lot of things use ice patches, but we don't, think about it, right? So
just to get a sense, how big are these ice patches? You said there's you've visited about 16 of them. There's a couple hundred in total.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of picturing in my head, I guess, sort of like mountains on either side, and there's like sort of a basin with a bunch of snow and ice in it. But I don't really have a sense of the scale.
Yeah, so that they vary in size from, say, a couple of 100 meters across to 100 meters wide, and often they're like little crescentic shapes, just nestled in a slope, usually north facing, where a bunch of snow gets captured, right? Like the lee side from the wind, north facing, that's a good spot where the snow will just stay long enough to turn into ice. And the difference between these things is that they're between these and glaciers is that they don't move under their own weight, or really the bottom can deform a little bit, but for the most part they just sit there. And so they collect sediment, ice, right, and all the junk on the surface as time goes by, kind of like you would in a lake, but it's ice. Right?
I was going to say, it sounds very complimentary to what.
And the American listener will know this from TV, because this is where they have the cross country curling tournament every year. And yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. That's super interesting. I think all those ice studies are really, really neat. So I think one other thing we would like to know, if we could, is just that, so you're the chair of the CA Climate Change Committee. What sort of initiatives are you all working on? And could you tell us a little bit about that committee?
Yeah, right now our main thing that we're working on is gathering a community of climate change archaeologists in the country, because it is a massive issue. I mean, Herschel Island, which is a place in northern Yukon, just off the coast, was a place where Peter Dawson from University of Calgary went and did side scanning LiDAR and images, digital heritage kind of thing, with some historic sites up there. And the community there is like taken over, stewardship of these things. But the reason they went there was because of sea level rise and permafrost thaw, right? And so these things are re-sculpturing the landscape in the north. Like permafrost thaw, it's like a giant bulldozer's gone through some of these areas. And, it just made it, it's in The Guardian, yesterday about Herschel Island, and it's flooded out, and these structures and other tangible heritage for the community there is under threat. And that's a story that is all around Canada, everywhere, including interior Canada. Like we've talked about wildfires and effects of drought and all of that. So it's a big country with a very rich archaeological record. And in order to mount anything in terms of climate change archaeology, we just need to work together. And So the first step is to find as many people as we can to connect and talk about what is happening and what can happen. So that's one main goal that we're working on. And so, we have our annual meetings where we can pull people together, but we're hoping to do sort of a broader reach out to people over time. And another thing that we're working on is working with the advocacy committee to try to convince decision makers that climate change archaeology is incredibly important and that we will lose a significant chunk of our past if we do not have a coordinated effort and funding to do this. It's a big thing. It's a big ask.
Yeah, it's not like, so put some contact information in the show notes so that the folks can reach out to you to kind of build this network if we have people listening that, who to call. But it's, like Robin's talking about, like I'm the chair of the advocacy committee. So Robin and I have kind of been working on this, and it's not just researchers. Like we need folks in CRM, we need governments, and that's like it's federal and provincial governments to be buying into this and being at the table. And it's kind of, it's a on all fronts sort of thing. And I think it's really great to get the sense that, we'll talk, Gabe's talked about coastal erosion a lot, and we talked about the coasts. But it's, I'm seeing in interior river systems, major erosion going on. And then, but then in areas where you're not looking at like, water system erosion, you're looking at massive fire damage and permafrost thaw and, ice caps melting. And so, it's all of this stuff is kind of happening at the same time. And so, I think it can also get a little bit overwhelming. And so one of the things I guess that, we have a lot of people who are not professional archaeologists who listen and kind of probably are wondering, like, is there something that the public can learn about, can reach out? Like, what do they need to know about climate change and archaeology? And is there anything that they can do to sort of help this, help, the CA Climate Change Committee or more broadly contribute to this kind of call to arms?
Yeah. There are a lot of avenues for people to get involved in archaeology. There are many avocational societies, archaeological societies across the country where you can engage directly with professional archaeologists. At the CAA is the big national version of it. But there are many more local places that you can get directly involved. And communication about climate change archaeology, people can write to decision makers if they feel this is an important issue, which I hope they do, and they can reach out to the Climate Change Committee directly at the CAA. As Ken said, he can put up some contact information, and we can help spread the word. In terms of learning about climate change archaeology, I think that that's something that our committee can work on, is creating some kind of portal where information is readily available on this. There are a lot of stories out there, individual stories that are Canadian, that are happening and that make big news, but a hub would be good, which we don't have right now. So,
yeah.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Just something that's like, a place for people to be able to see, like digest, at a little bit more kind of a, less technical way.
Yeah.
Just see up front, like this is what's happening. And I think, that's a good point. Like pulling together just media stories.
Curated doom
climate
scrolling.
Change archaeology, I think would. yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, you hit a interesting point here where often when I talk to archaeologists about this, it starts with the doom, but it ends really positive in that I think it unifies all archaeologists and people interested in archaeology and the communities whose archaeology, is at stake. Everybody understands this threat, and everybody doesn't want to see these things go away. And in order to do it, because it's such a monumental task, it's actually opportunity to do archaeology in new ways, technically, politically, regulatorily, right? Everything. We have an opportunity to change it and change it for the better. There's just no way this can happen without on the ground archaeology happening at the community level. And to me, that is a big step towards a change in the way archaeology is practiced entirely in the country, and taking it out of the hands of governments and academics and into the communities. And this is a place where that can happen, I think, with at least a muted amount of the, tension that can arise, and even tension between little sub-disciplines. Do we really need to wrangle about environmental determinism at this particular moment? I don't think so.
Yeah,
I really don't.
Yeah. I think that is a good positive note to wrap up on, is that that this is kind of driving kind of a new, it's pushing us to do stuff that is better archaeology, more engaged archaeology, and I think and that's engagement with descendant communities, with publics, and with bringing academic, CRM, government archaeology all kind of together to push this.
And thanks very much for coming on, Robin, and sharing your work with us, and sharing some of the climate change, CA Climate Change Committee information. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin.
Well, Ken, I think it's time for hit pieces. And you may have heard of hot stove talk, hot pockets, but have you ever heard of a hot hit piece?
Well, I think the listener's about to find out.
That's right. This is our first ever hit piece that's got a live guest.
Exactly. And so
I shouldn't phrase it that way. It makes it sound like we've had hit pieces with dead guests before.
we'll just turn it over to Sarah now.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we'll be talking about the CCRA with Sarah Beanlands.
That's right.
So for our hit piece today, we're joined by Sarah Beanlands, who's a founding partner of Boreas Heritage Consulting. Over the past 25 years, she's undertaken a wide range of historical research and archaeological assessment work throughout Atlantic Canada. Before becoming a principal and senior archaeologist with Boreas, she completed a bachelor's degree in history and anthropology at Dal and her master's degree in history at St. Mary's University. She's also an adjunct faculty member at St. Mary's University, and her publications have appeared in such journals as the Royal Nova Scotia Historical Society. But she's joining us today to talk about an upcoming meeting of the Canadian Cultural Resources Association, the first such meeting, I believe, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Sarah. This is our first live hit piece. So you're like the first featured guest of a hit piece. That's a.
I feel very privileged, actually, right now.
Yeah.
That's what we strive for on this program, is to make the guests feel privileged.
So can you give, for the listeners, just a brief overview of what the CCRA is, so the Canadian Cultural Resources Association, and sort of what where it came from, basically? Like, where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so the last time the three of us spoke for the podcast, I believe, was at the CAA in Saskatoon. And we had just wrapped up a session on the critical need for a trade association for cultural resource management in Canada. And that that session had gotten a lot of positive response. We'd asked the question of the participants, is there a need for a CRM trade association in Canada? And I think we had almost a unanimous response that yes, this was something that we needed in the industry. We took that, and just a handful of us have been working ever since that session to put sort of the foundational building blocks together to get a trade association established. So it's been less than a year, and we've been working quite hard to get like mission statements and all the things that you need to incorporate a not-for-profit society. We had this idea that it would be a great way to kick off to have a one-day conference, really to introduce the CCRA, what our purpose is, what the benefits are for membership, and really just talk again about the need for a trade association in CRM. So we decided, I think it's March 15th in Toronto, we'll have the first ever annual CCRA conference. And we've got all kinds of speakers. We have people coming in from the United States. We have speakers from the UK, and then across Canada as well. And the CCRA, really, the intention is to build a stronger industry for cultural resource management. So we really don't have a unified voice for archaeology, for CRM archaeology in the country. And I think it's really important that we unite when it comes to building a stronger industry. And so that would include things like business, like providing business development tools and support to CRM companies, advocating government and lobbying at federal, provincial, municipal levels when necessary, have a centralized organization for public or media comment on heritage issues, to provide educational workshops for both companies and practitioners, the development of best practices documents for heritage practices, and representing the corporate or business interests of companies within the heritage sector. And I mean, there'll be all kinds of other things that the CCRA can do, but those are some of the core ideas that we feel that having a trade association is essential. We're really, I think, when we had that meeting in Saskatoon, despite the fact that regulations vary across the country and we're working in different environments and that sort of thing, the challenges that the industry faces as a whole seems to really spread right across the country. So the challenges that I face as a CRM archaeologist in Nova Scotia were being echoed by CRM archaeologists right across the country, all the way to British Columbia and all the way up north. So I think we have a lot we can do to support the industry in Canada and to support each other, build a better industry, make the business of archaeology the best it can be in Canada.
That's great. And so, in addition for the opportunity to get a bicep tattoo at this meeting that says "building a stronger industry," who is the meeting aimed at? So, is it more senior archaeologists, or is it really everyone in the CRM business, ranging from senior arcs to techs, or who would be best served by this meeting?
So everyone is welcome, Gabe, to attend. It's really geared toward business owners. However, that's not, that's just because the nature of a trade organization. However, everyone is welcome. Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Well, so what I was going to say is I think there's like a difference here between a trade association and a professional association or a professional society, and that's that this is really about the companies basically sort of uniting in a group rather than just individuals sort of. And so my understanding is they're going to follow the model of the American Cultural Resources Association, which is that companies would become part of the CCRA, and therefore all of your members, all of your employees are then automatically members of the CCRA. Is that correct?
That's right, Ken. And I'm really glad you brought up ACRA, the American Cultural Resources Association, because they have been established for quite some time now, and they've been very, very successful in the United States. They have provided us with so much generous support. I honestly don't think that we'd be where we are right now without the support of ACRA, particularly Richard Grubb, who's been part of our organizing committee. And we've really used ACRA as a model. Not to say, I mean, obviously, the situation in Canada is unique and it's going to be specific to the needs of Canadian archaeologists and Canadian CRM companies. But having ACRA to help us along the way, to really sort of ease that process of getting established has just been critical in getting us where we are right now. But yes, you're right. So if a company were to become a member of the CCRA, it doesn't matter if they have 100 employees. All of their employees will automatically become members of the CCRA as well. And it is intended for all companies of all sizes. So we will work just as hard for sole proprietorships as we will for big, large environmental consulting firms. So also for both membership and to attend the conference in Toronto, everyone is welcome. So you could also, even if you are not the owner of a company or a senior archaeologist at a company, very welcome to join and would certainly benefit if you are working in CRM. So individuals can join as well. And there's also opportunities for students to join and emerging professionals. So it's really for everybody who is working within CRM in Canada, but it's, the focus will be on the business of archaeology, so on CRM firms.
Yeah, and I saw too that I don't think it's on the promotional poster that I have up in front of me, but for full disclosure, I've been sort of engaged on the emails for a lot of the planning session for this, but I have not been able to attend a lot of the things, in part because I teach, and right around the same time it seems like it's scheduled. But that's in some of the most recent ones, it's not just companies too. There are Indigenous community groups that are going to be attending and participating in some of the sessions. So there's a couple of hours, it looks like, set aside in the afternoon. So Steve Caston, who is the Indigenous Engagement Supervisor at Jacobs, which I believe is a CRM company, but Mississauga is the credit, and the Six Nations, and there's a couple of other First Nations communities from Southern Ontario are participating in it. And so one of the key things that I think, there's a survey that's out right now asking potential members of the CCRA to kind of outline what their priorities are. Among them, there is sort of defining what the CCRA is going to do, but it includes like what is the scope and scale of like Indigenous and descendant community involvement, the government relations that you mentioned, and sort of these media relations and standardizing procedures across the country. And so among that, I guess I'm kind of curious, and this may have come up in conversations you guys have had already, and it might be something that comes up the day of. In sort of the current geopolitical climate, where we've got this sort of talk of like interprovincial trade barriers coming down, do you get a sense of like that's going to shape what the CCR like? Do you get the sense that makes it more relevant? That this is kind of you're getting in at the right time kind of thing?
I think it makes it not just relevant, but absolutely necessary. Honestly, I mean, we don't know the future is so uncertain right now, that we really don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the talk about like the potential economic challenges that tariffs might bring. But we're also in Nova Scotia, where there's a lot of conversation about increased in development and industrial activity to become, more self-reliant. What is that going to do to the demand for archaeologists? Right. So it could be. It's just so uncertain. But that's why we need a united voice to lobby for cultural resource management when when things are so uncertain. And, I've found that archaeology is often one of the first things to fall off the boat when times get tight. And it's just really important that we're able to have a voice in the conversations that are undoubtedly going to happen. So I'm not sure what this means for the future of CRM across the country, but I do know that having a organization like the CCRA to fight for CRM, to fight for archaeology, to really speak up and ensure that best practices are being followed is it's just absolutely necessary.
Great. And before we let you go, Sarah, could you give us a little bit of a rundown on what some of the presentation topics are going to be? You mentioned you've got folks coming in from all over the place to present, and so I think the listener might be curious to know about that.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Ken, don't feel bad that you can't always make the meetings, because that's one of the main issues that we've heard from CRM practitioners is just a lack of time. Like everybody is so overloaded with work that we've really had, just a really small group of people that have been able to really participate in, these first steps to establish the organization. But anybody who is interested in helping out is so very welcome. And I also think, we talk about how important this first conference is. We really need people to share what they want out of the CCRA. Like that's what's most important. We have an idea of what we think the industry needs, but we really need to hear from people about what they need so that they can play a part in shaping this organization, because the organization is meant to be for the CRM industry. So we don't want to dictate how it's going to roll out, or what are the kind of benefits or offers that membership will bring. We need to hear from people working in the industry what they need and what they want. And that's I think, Ken, you're going to be speaking in the afternoon, and probably will touch on some of those things that people feel they need or are looking for. Um,
Sarah, I've
for
got bad news. When you ask Ken to speak in the afternoon, it sometimes goes into the early evening, in my experience.
It's okay. I know what my time slot is. It's also I'm a co-author on a paper, so it's they can reel me in. That's the idea.
Yeah, no, I'm just I'll tell you. So the morning is really our international um, participants, who are people who have already been through this and are involved in well-established CRM trade associations. So we're going to have, God, if I have.
I've got the LinkedIn, the newest poster is up. Actually, this is the one I was looking for, and it's got Richard Grubb from ACRA, Kenneth Atchison from FAME, which is the Federation of Archaeological Managers and Employers in the United Kingdom, Andrew Goldberg, Andrew Goldberg with Agora, and I don't know what that organization is, and then Chris Dorr, who is the incoming president for the Society for American Archaeology. He also owns a company called HBiz, and they've done some CRM industry tracking over the last few years as well.
And he was the RPA guy for ages, I remember too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So he's been involved in a number of these different organizations.
So the morning will be about learning from others, learning sort of from global perspectives is how we framed it. And then the afternoon, so Ken will be presenting a paper on behalf of Matt Monroe and Lindsay Abinson-Meyer. And that's on, I think, the survey results of the nationwide survey that they undertook. We'll have Steve talking, hosting an Indigenous panel to talk about best practices for Indigenous archaeology and CRM. And then Matthew Baudouin out of TMHC, and he's going to talk about where the CCRA fits within the Canadian context. And then I think the last...
And for the listener, we've talked about some of Matt Baudouin is one of the co-creators of the website Insituated. He and Joshua Dent have both written about and published on sort of the evolution of the Canadian CRM industry.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last part of the afternoon will be myself and Marie-Anne Paradis out of Artefact Urbain, that's where we're going to open it up to talk about future initiatives of the CCRA. What does membership look like? What are they looking for in terms of benefits? What do they want the CCRA to do for them? So it's really about generating feedback from people in the room that we can build into the organization right from the very beginning. So I think that's going to be a really, really important part of the day as well. And we've had just so much positive feedback, so much interest. We're almost at full capacity now for the amount of people that we can take. So if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, I would urge you to do so. And hopefully by the time this airs, we won't be already filled up. But we've had just tremendous support, lots of sponsorships, lots of chatter and excitement about it. So it really is going to be, I think, just a monumental event, honestly, and really to get us off the ground running and ensure that the CCRA is a success. Because I know, people have tried for many years to establish an organization like this in Canada, and there have been a lot of good work, but never been able to really get it over the finish line. And we're still obviously in the very, very early stages of building the organization, which is why we want people involved right from the beginning, to ensure that we make it what it needs to be and what people are looking for. And we're just really looking to shape a unified vision for archaeology and heritage across the country.
That's great. And so just to remind everybody, so that's the first annual conference of the Canadian Cultural Resources Association. It is March 15th, 2025. So it's a month and a day from when we recorded this, and just a shade under a month from when this will come out. It's going to be held at the Toronto Airport Marriott Hotel, which is also the host hotel. So they've set up, there's a room rate that you can get along with it. For those of you who are interested, if you register before the end of the day today, I guess by the time this comes out, the early bird registration will be done. But it's $125 for the registration. That gets you a membership. And if you are interested in sponsoring them, $250 will get you a sponsorship. You can email Canadian capital CR Association at gmail.com, and you can find them on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, we're just getting started. We don't have a website yet, but that's coming. But yeah, if you are interested, not just in attending the conference, but in participating in building this organization, becoming a committee member, or whatever in any way, please reach out to us, because we really want to involve as many people as we possibly can. So yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll definitely try to keep pumping out information so that everybody knows what's going on. And I do know that Matt Baudouin is going to the CAA in St. John's in May, and he will be following up with a second session on the advances that the CCRA has made since we were last together in Saskatoon. So really excited about that too.
That's great.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us to tell us about this, Sarah. And I think the other thing is the listener can look forward to, Ken is going to be there live, probably with a microphone. And so
we'll be doing a CCRA special episode, so stay tuned for that, probably coming out at the end
Yeah,
of March.
I know we really appreciate your support. You've just got a fantastic podcast on the go, and I know you've got lots of listeners, so we're really grateful that you would take the time to give us, what did you call it? A hot what? What is this?
Oh, you're a
A
hit
hit
piece.
A hit piece.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was
The
going
only
to say
thing-
a hot mess.
Yeah, the hot hit piece. Yeah. So the only other thing I ask, Sarah, is that I get a media lanyard. If I'm going to have the microphone with me, that I get 2 lanyards. One as an attendee,
Yeah.
and one with media.
He
on
wants
it,
the medium because usually he's a small. That's the problem.
Ken will treat you right. Don't worry. We're really, really happy that you are able to be there and that you're able to speak. And we're really looking forward to seeing you, Gabe, at the next one in 2026, which is the organization is already starting. And we're hoping to have it in Quebec City in 2026. So we expect you to be there, Gabe.
All right, I can't
Awesome.
wait.
Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. We'll see you in a month.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, Ken, I think we've reached the end of another episode of the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. Congratulations on lasting for 50 episodes.
I think we're now at the end of 51. So we did last for 50.
Except we're not celebrating the first one. So we've had 50 ones that we like.
Right. We've had 50 good episodes of the New Brunswick Archaeology Podcast. That's a fair. So actually, now that we're at 51, should we just go ahead and remove the first one and actually go ahead with that trailer that we keep saying we're going to do?
Yeah, I think we should.
Yeah. That might be something to put into action.
That might be something to put into action. It might be something to especially put into action once we are sure that we have enough funds to continue to keep Emmanuel employed moving forward, not just on rebuilding episode 1.
This is it, Emmanuel. You're about to get a big bonus if the winds shift in our favor.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, Ken. Well, I guess we'll talk to you again in another fortnight. We've got a bunch of episodes lined up here for the listener moving through and into the spring.
Yeah. We've got some exciting stuff coming up. We'll be continuing episodes talking about climate change and archaeology. Will be some highlights from the Canadian Cultural Resources Association meeting. And I think we're going to actually get an opportunity to do a podcast about a podcast, actually.
That's the plan, weather permitting.
Weather permitting. All right, listener, we will talk to you in a fortnight, and thank you for being with us for 50 good episodes. And for those of you stuck around for 51, all the power to you.
Exactly. Talk to you soon, listener.